Michael, it's great to see you again.
You
I know
too,
we,
Mitchell.
I know we touched base a little while ago, but I was wondering if you could maybe just in broad strokes give an overview of State of the Union as far as the job market for CISOs and other CVP director level cybersecurity executives are concerned. What do you see in the market?
Yeah, first of all, it's great to see you again. And always appreciate what you're doing with the community and the reputation that your organization's built. So thanks for having me. Yeah, I mean, not to start off on a depressing note, but just I guess a brush of reality here. That statistically, let's kind of separate that, but statistically, we're in a pretty terrible CISO market, job market, that is, and not just CISOs, but kind of senior security leaders in general. For the first time in our very brief history here of the CISO, there's a greater supply than demand by a massive factor, 5x, right? There's more CISOs and you know senior security leaders out of work or looking for new roles than any other time in our brief history. Let's call that 15 to 17 years or so of this function, and it's actually taken a lot of people by surprise. I mean, you'd be, I guess, maybe not surprised, but the number of people that I talk to on a daily basis who are looking for roles, who are contacting us, and I say, no, this is what's going on statistically, they're shocked, right? Because they haven't had to flex this muscle, right? This is not something that they've had to look for a role, and so they finally are looking for a role for the first time in maybe 8 to 15 years, and they realize, wow, this is not easy. It's super competitive. And obviously, there's a lot of people ask me, well, why is it going on? What's the factors? And it's not just one thing, although I will say the economy, the global economy, global economic indicators have certainly driven this, right? Cost cutting. I mean, no one really cut during, not many companies cut during the pandemic, during the height of the pandemic. It was just not the right thing morally to do. People made other concessions. Even though business was slow for many companies, they now are looking at it a couple of years later and going, okay, now the market is reacting to that, and so they're actually cutting a little bit deeper, and you're still seeing cuts. I mean, there was just some yesterday that were announced, here in March of 2024. We thought we were past it, but we're not. And so it's really taken a few people by surprise who have looked for the first time. But there's also the tide has turned on companies realizing that maybe they don't need a CISO, and maybe they don't need a full CISO. Maybe it's more of a director on the compliance side. Maybe it's more of a VP on the application side. Whatever it is, they've actually gotten, the good news here is they've actually gotten more defined on what is needed for their security posture, and not looked at a common playbook and said, we must go get a CISO. And then they have some guy like me asking why they need a CISO, and they're not having a really great answer. And I'm like, no, then maybe you don't need a CISO. So we actually talk more companies out of hiring CISOs than we do ever talking them into hiring us to find their CISO. It's probably a 10-to-1 ratio in the number of people I talk out of going through this painful process. So, but that's just the reality. So people are getting better. Companies are getting better educated. They're also tying security back to profitability and revenues. And so that's more of a trend that we're seeing. So it's not just, hey, go spend and make us protected. Now it's, we know that we need to be protected, but we also need this to help drive the features and functionalities of our product and our service. And so we need the CISO to be more heavily involved in that sales function, even part of the pipeline.
Interesting.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, there's a couple of things going on, but the depressing part about it is that we're in a really bad market. Now, all that said, the conditions are seemingly improving, and there's I guess three areas here. One, there's always a lot of people are like, hey, there's tons of moves going on, and there's I'm seeing a lot of activity. That's not untrue. Okay, let's just establish that. There is a lot of activity, but activity should not be construed as the market returning. This is a time of year, January, February, March, April. It is always busy, right? There's always musical chairs occurring where people are leaving for one opportunity or another. A lot of people retire during this time. A lot of people wait for their bonus during this time. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of just from an HR cycle or talent cycle, there's always musical chairs occurring. Right now, we're seeing those musical chairs occurring at kind of the enterprise level with some very high profile CISOs departing, moving to new places, taking retirements. Burnout is still a thing. I don't want to gloss over that. There are still plenty of CISOs in burnout stage. But there are also pockets of really good signs. So, for instance, one of the younger public companies, and we're working with a few of them right now on their search, but they're trying to navigate through this new world with the SEC final rule. They've kind of limped through their IPO, their public offering, um, with a possible CISO, but a lot of them don't have their first global CISO, or it was defined in something else. Maybe it was defined around compliance. Maybe it was defined around the IT security piece, and now they're realizing, the AppSec piece or the software piece is where they're really attacking. Of course, phishing and those type of things are still up. Ransomware is still flat, but seemingly increasing. But the complexity of the attack surfaces has gotten them thinking, well, we need to change what we're looking for. And so there's those companies that are considering that too. The tech companies are also starting to recover. The ones that have valid revenue models, that is, I think there's still a need to say, yes, you can spend on this side, but we need to see that it's going to be an advantage to the company. So these high consequence data environments, financial data or privacy data or minor, when we have one for minors, right? Like that data is very high consequence. It's what you want, genetic data. So those companies are hiring their CISOs earlier in the process, which is creating some activity now as well. And then, of course, things like the BISO is continuing to expand, different versions of that. The vCISO is very warm right now, although very crowded, but very warm. So there definitely is. I don't want to sit here and set the doom and gloom because that's not really what's going on. But it is for people that are coming into the market for the first time and haven't looked for a role in maybe a decade. It would be surprising when they hear from someone like me that we're in a terrible market because they see all this activity. But really, the reality is that there are statistically more people out of work in the CISO realm than there ever have been in history. There's also more of them than there ever have been in history too. So you have to put it in perspective. So anyway, that's a lot to throw at you.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's like a supply and demand. I have so many questions for you.
Yeah, please just jump in. Jump in.
So the first question is, uh, I think a year ago, maybe a couple of years ago, I saw this report. I think it was circulated around Black Hat or RSA that said we have a staggering shortage of cybersecurity professionals. It was just absolutely they in certain figures were cited and it's absolutely staggering of what's needed by the industry and what's available.
Yeah.
Later on, someone made a comment that potentially organizations that funded this research or kind of created this research were in cybersecurity training. So they had vested interest in creating this appearance of this shortage so that people kind of sign up with them, get trained because they would see that the potential jobs are available. I'm not sure if it's true or not. That's what I heard. So the question is, you probably have much clearer view on that. So the question is, this disbalance in terms of supply and demand on the CISO side,
Yeah.
do you see it just at the executive level? So essentially, is it still true that there was a shortage, but maybe at analyst level or, I mean, SOC analysts or what have you, there was still a shortage, but as you go further up, there's this a little bit of a disbalance, or do you think this supply-demand disbalance is true throughout the entire stack of the cybersecurity positions? So this is the first question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I have been asked a lot about this, massive gap, right? And the thing is that it captures the entire stack, like you said, I think very wisely. It's from trainees all the way to executive. And I can only comment on that sort of senior level role because I really don't have a view. There's other firms out there that do a great job on the sort of contributor layer and the supporting layers. We just unfortunately don't do that, so I don't have a great view. But I can tell you at the senior layers, there's still very much a shortage. As crazy as what I just said earlier, and that is true. And the reason why is because when a company is looking for a CISO, they tend to not understand the nuance of what they're looking for. And we know this, by the way, factually, because we do this thing called interviewing the interviewers, which I think I've spoken about before on with you. And that is when we interview the entire executive team and the interview team prior to introducing, candidate humans to the process. Over 75% of those interviews we conduct result in us realizing that the interviewers, excuse me, actually have no comprehension about what the level of leader that they would need is and how to define what success of a security posture or security program in their own company might look like. So, and we do that for that reason. We want to understand how sophisticated are they, the engineering team, marketing team, legal. They all have what they think they want, and it's usually something that's right in front of them, but it's very difficult that's blocking them or something that they feel is reactive. They have a really hard time defining, narrating, and actually speaking to what a successful security posture and program would look like in their organization. So that's the math behind it. 3/4 of the companies out there that we interview don't understand what they want, and so that actually translates into this problem that I'm talking about is that even in today, I mean, and by the way, I hope that they don't all figure it out because then I'll be out of a job, as will some of my other allies. But I don't have I'm not worried about that threat. I think people look at security in a very reactive way when they're hiring a CISO or anything like that.
Mhm.
And so typically you want to understand that nuance. And so at that nuance level, you realize, well, I need someone who's both technical, who's very strategic, who can work on the compliance standards, who can answer all these questionnaires, but also can defend in a very complex attack surface. Oh, by the way, we're public now. We have huge regulatory needs. We have to not only show what we're doing, we have to prove it to the government. And so it's a very complex skill set. It's probably one of the reasons why crazy folks like me are still just doing CISO roles. There's plenty of search firms that'll run a CISO, but there's very few of us that just do this, and it's because it's hard. It's very nuanced. We love it, but it's hard, and so I think there is a very large shortage of truly qualified candidates for everything the client is looking for,
Mhm.
versus just a shortage overall, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
The other thing I'd say about it is that things are becoming more complex, especially with AI and machine learning, and these large language models are really stretching the capabilities of what was an IT security focused CISO or a compliance focused CISO, is now realizing they have to reskill themselves, and really go out and learn a lot more. So you have a massive part of the CISO population that is
Mhm.
being reskilled right now to keep up with the modern requirements. And that's a good sign, right? We don't want to leave those folks behind. We want to make sure that they're trained. They are amazing at what they do. They just have to be in a new subset. And so that because of that evolution that's occurring and those folks catching up, these are very senior people, but they may not have that skill set. As that means that we're focusing on a very thin layer of small software-based CISOs, which happens to be what we do, but it is crazy. The number of companies that call us saying we're looking for this thing, now go fetch, and we have to say, actually, that's going to be really hard to go get you. We see that every day. And when we spoke to well over 100 companies last year, we only did a fraction of those in CISO searches. So you could
Interesting.
see kind of, yeah.
So it's almost, it sounds like even though there's 5x supply versus demand overall for very specific searches, it's almost sounds like it's the opposite, right? So if companies are looking
Yeah.
something that very specific, there may be only a handful of candidates. So it's actually
Exactly. Yeah, and put it in perspective too. No one calls us for the easy ones, right? Like we don't get the pick. I won't get off of this recording, and there'll be someone. Hey, we're just looking for a CISO, like just any old CISO, just any old, anything will do if they know how to spell CISO. Then they're good. Like we get called for the purple squirrel. That's why we exist, right? And I
mission
get that.
impossible. Mission impossible.
Exactly, right. But by the way, we love it. We love it. It makes it really interesting. But there's a huge amount of education on what the client wants, what the client needs, and what the client's going to get. We have to
Mhm.
be very professional and tactful in explaining that those are actually three different things.
Certainly.
So
I want to double click on something that you
yeah.
mentioned in terms of upskilling, and particularly you mentioned AI, which obviously is top of mind for a lot of people. But you also before that you mentioned that CISOs are now expected to be more client facing and more involved in revenue generating motion on the company side. Can you maybe like expand a little bit on those two, but also if I'm a CISO, uh, I've been at a company for 2+ years. I'm looking for the potential, looking for the next gig. It's not imminent, but the writing's on the wall that within 6 months, 1 year, maybe a little bit further, I'll need to be looking for a new opportunity. In addition to AI, in addition to wearing more of a business hat, being involved in business decisions and thinking about revenue, what other areas you see that CISOs, other CVP direct level cybersecurity executives would need to focus on in terms of getting additional skills, additional knowledge and experience that they can use that time while still at the company, so that by the time they need to look for a job, they're ready.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. So I'll start. I think I start with the original question, which was how I believe how have we seen the increase on the sales enablement side over the past few years, I guess, and how has that increased? That was the first question, I believe. Um, we've noticed a pretty steady trend with all of our clients and all of our prospects, even the companies that approach us. We actually only take on maybe one out of every 8 or 10 searches that we actually present to, just for what it's worth. A lot of them we recognize that there's no C, there's no O, and that in the CISO acronym, and so it probably doesn't make any sense for us to move forward. We can give the client advice. But there probably doesn't make sense for them to engage with us, and or even a search firm. We don't lose a lot to competition. We have some great competition out there, some good allies, but most of the time it's the companies wanting to do it on their own or realizing, or we realize it's probably not something that they should go to search with. So just I wanted to put that out there too. But with the ones that we do it, we've noticed when we first started the company, maybe if I was being aggressive, I would say 10% of the scope on average was dealing with customer facing duties, probably as remedial as the putting a process together to be more efficient around questionnaire responses from potential customers for a service. And now that's 8 years ago, 9 years ago. So now it's a good solid 30, sometimes 40% of that. So it's tripled, at least tripled. And the work, the scope is a lot more intimate to the customer. It's more about helping build pipeline, CISOs being in front of other CISOs to help drive actual sales. Yes, the questionnaires have not gone away. They've probably even gotten more intensive, but this is now very much a sales driven activity. A lot of companies realize that security and privacy and trust are major functions and features of their product, and so they want their CISO to be forward facing. Changes the way that they're looking at that individual, and what's really hard for companies to understand is that CISOs out of the box, most CISOs, the majority of them, have not been exposed to that level of sales enablement, and that's probably not going to be their superpower in most cases. Of course, there's outliers, but and so that's difficult for companies to wrap their head around. Why can't this person be the best at defending the complex attack surface at the technical end, work with engineers, and also be amazing in front of customers? Well, those two skill sets don't run parallel in the trajectory of a CISO. That's why. And oh, by the way, be amazing at compliance. So anyway, there's a void there, but we have seen a massive increase. We're doing a search right now, or they're expecting the CISO to be on, many sales calls per month, right? And it's not a field CISO, it's an operating CISO role. They're running the teams, but there's this huge section there, and so they have to build their teams a little bit differently. It's one of the areas where a BISO comes in. They have this supporting cast around them now. So anyway, that's that. I think the other question was, how do you prepare yourself if you're sitting in an environment? Did I get?
Well, actually, more along the lines AI business expertise. What other areas where you see
Yeah,
the world is moving?
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. The baseline of understanding AI and machine learning in a security environment, in my opinion, is understanding AppSec, right? So if you don't understand how the software components interact and how that attack surface changes with product level security and application level security, that's your starting point, right? So I think there is a huge increase in need for that. Some people call it the technical CISO, right? I think it's a lot more nuanced than that, but I think understanding how to act like an engineer, think like an engineer, talk like an engineer with the engineering teams, with the product teams, because those are the folks that are building these complex systems to allow for AI and machine learning as part of your product and your company. These are areas where they're going to have to hone in on those skill sets. And I have seen one of the really cool things that we've seen since we started the company is there was probably 150 to 200 really solid sort of modern AppSec CISO types when we first started the company. And that has now gone into the thousands. So people have really, and obviously software is everywhere. So not surprising, but it is really great to see that there's so many more candidates that are real well trained on this, complex AppSec, ProdSec type of discussion, security engineering. But that's where it starts. The other piece is how do you look at the governance around that, right? And the regulatory and compliance needs. And so I think someone who has a real superpower of understanding what we're saying we're doing and what we're actually doing, and be able to narrate that and narrate the risks individually at the executive level, saying, okay, if we build it this way, or if we allow our users to do this with AI, these are the risks that we're establishing, right? So we need to all know this. And so, like a CISO's job is not to just make everyone sleep better at night. It's also to be the chief kind of look around the corner officer and say, hey, these are the risks that are about to hit our company, and we need to figure out a way together. I'll help shepherd it, but I need to, I'm not going to go off and fix everything. This is a company-wide issue, right? The way that we do our hygiene is a company-wide issue. The way that we allow systems to be used is a company-wide issue. And so it's an educational thing for CISOs to get everyone on the awareness scale and to be a better teacher. And they need to be sponsored in order to do that. If everyone's not listening to them, it's just they're sitting on an island, that probably their posture is probably not going to be very strong. So I think AppSec, security engineering, product security, all those components, we're seeing a heavy elevation of need, but also an expectation. So that'd be one big one.
Makes sense. And kind of going back to the first thing that you mentioned as some of the reasons for this disbalance of more CISOs looking for a job than actually positions available in general. And I would venture a guess, I just kind of also want to kind of double click a little bit on that. The world changed from zero interest rate environment when it's go, money's free, companies building, bloated, for lack of a better term, infrastructure. And now it seems like a lot of companies, they were valued before as high growth VC plays. Now they're valued as profit making machines and the private equity multiples, which
Mhm.
kind of pushes companies to cut. Kind of broadly speaking, it's probably one of the reasons. Another reason maybe is that technology, AI is making organizations more efficient. So a team of 20 was handling the task before, now a team of 5 will do the same job. And probably not fully kind of baked out. Other companies maybe are reassessing. Maybe we can farm out a lot of it to managed service providers, and the rest just rep and give it to CIO, CTO. And it's probably kind of a range of factors, but from what you're seeing, what other factors are impacting the current state of affairs? Did I miss anything? And what kind of weights you put on some of them?
Yeah, first of all, I can confirm that all that's happening. We hear every scenario. Some of them are surprising, given the nature of a company, and they tell us what their plan is around this. And I'm like, really? That's interesting. I'll be now canceling my service with you. So, as I know that my data is no longer going to be safe. So, I guess the other factors were we have companies that I don't even know the right. I'd like to come up with a cool name for it, but someone probably has. But there's some sort of model around, breach numbness, I guess, is what I guess I would call it, for a lack of better. Maybe one of your users can come up with a good name contest. But yeah, the breaches used to be, oh my gosh, did you hear this? It was on front page of the Wall Street Journal, and it still is, for the wrong reasons, right? But it's happening so common now that every week you'd probably have a new breach. I mean, the Change Healthcare one was the most recent big news one, and all these records and all this data is out there now. But it just seems like at least every month, and so there's become sort of a numbness. We've had companies that call us and they're like, we want to get a senior security leader in here. We're not sure if it's a CISO. And I would just say, well, why not a CISO? What are you, not trying to talk you into it or out of it, but walk me through your logic. And they said, well, we're concerned about the investment we have to make, because we look to the left, and our biggest competitor over here just got breached and splayed all over the Wall Street Journal. They're a public company there, and they showed their response, and their stock went up. And then off to the right, we have a smaller player that was also a pretty big breach, and they're looking to go public, and they're getting all of this press right now for their response. And so they're like, well, why should we do it? Why should we make this investment? Which is crazy to hear the first time when I did it, but if you're a company figuring out where else do I need to use like you said, the money is no longer cheap, right? It's hard to come by, and the funding is hard to come by. So where are we going to go spend time? Maybe they don't need a CISO. Maybe there's plausible. We have other ones that have had incidents, and had one a couple weeks ago where we were talking to them, and it was a normal conversation. We've had an incident, and we really, our board wants to move very quickly in finding someone. And I said, well, when did this happen? And they said it was February, or it was early February. And I was like, oh, you mean like, this February? He's like, no, February 23. So
Wow.
they had an incident in February 23. And I said, well, what occurred? So well, we had a lot of remediation. We did the investigation, and now the board has approved for us to go get something done about it. I'm like, wow. Like a year later,
Moving
that
at
we're
speed of light.
yeah, well, and that's not uncommon, right? And so so there's some other factors that are going on there as well. But I do think you covered the major ones. Yeah, there's a
And
couple other
as far as
factors.
putting the weight, is it the change the interest rate environment as kind of the bulk of the impact, or is
I
it
think so. Yeah, I think so. I mean, security and IT folks like to think that we're still our special flower and nothing affects us. But I always tell this to people. I'm like, we should be thankful that we're actually living through this time. I'm not a CISO, but as a practitioners are living through this time, because it actually means that we've actually reached the mountaintop. We've reached the table. Everyone's like, well, we need CISOs to be at the seat at the table. You're at the seat at the table, and you're getting treated like every other adult there. right? So you're not going to have the special, extra budget to go get these other 20 people. Everyone's going to be looking at your investment and the same as everything else. And that's actually a good thing. I know it sounds bad, but it's a good thing, because it means that you're now part of that core that needs to make decisions for the company, not just for the protection and the thing that you're doing. So, but I do think it's driven by that piece as well. So the macroeconomics are really tough to ignore
Well, I guess
when you're.
where I'm going with this question is that as a lot of people expect interest rates to start coming down, and markets are ripping still. So in
Yeah,
anticipation of that, which you can make an argument that cheaper money is just around the corner, which will reset some of the expectations, and we'll go from lean to fat times. Hopefully, that's expectation of some of the market players, and hopefully, and probably will trickle through to boardrooms and corporate kind of conversations at the executive level. So
yeah.
that's kind of the reason I ask a question. So if the bulk of the reason is the economic conditions right now, and if they're changing or expected to change, one would argue that the hiring and the job market will change with it as well, if that was the major factor.
Yeah, that's great. I'm not an economist by any stretch of imagination, but I also know that these things take a lot longer to unfold than we realize, right? A lot of people are still surprised about how long it's taken to get out of this barren desert of CISO work. It's been a couple of years for us. Like, it hasn't been a year. It has been definitely more than a year for us. Like, pretty
Interesting.
terrible year last year. And we're thankful we have great clients and great business. But definitely a down year for most everyone in the industry, and of course for the CISOs, more importantly. Um, so I think it's going to take longer. I do think that we'll see a little bit of a late, like starting in late April, going into May, and probably throughout the summer, a pretty good run on what you're talking about, and some good activity, some good, solid, qualified activity. The thing is, we're also in an election year, and it's a huge election, as they all are, and the country is still very divided. And so there's just a lot that's going to occur in the political nature, which will affect the financial markets, which will affect what we're talking about here. And so I think we really need to take into account the kind of the interesting year we're about to hit upon. It's almost like no one's yet talking about what's going to happen in the fall,
Well,
but
usually,
know better.
usually companies kind of they pause just to see where things
Right.
will shake out. So that it's kind of things
That's
take.
right. That's where I was going with it, is that I do think we'll have an interesting Q2 and probably a little most of Q3, but Q4, wow, it's unpredictable.
Oh,
So, and we could be right back in this place next year at this time, or we could be in a much different place. It's very difficult to predict.
I
So,
make predictions for myself, and I'm always surprised how wrong I am most of the time. It's just it's
uh,
fascinating. Like, I know we're coming up on time. Just as we wrap up, maybe like rapid kind of bites
sure.
wisdom from Michael. So I just want to throw at you four scenarios, and I wonder what would be your suggestion. What are the two, three things a person in those circumstances should focus their attention and their energy on? Scenario number one, I'm a CISO. I'm not actively searching for a new role, but it's clear that a year from now, 2 years from now, I'll need to be looking for a job. What should I focus on? What are two, three things I should focus on today? Scenario number two, the transition is imminent. Either the decision is already made, maybe the company was acquired, or um, for one reason or another, I need to be looking for a job in 3 months time frame. What are a handful of things I should be looking at? Third one, I'm
Mhm.
out of the job. I'm no longer with the company. It could be a few weeks. It could be a few months. I'm realizing the position I'm in, as you mentioned, that things take longer than I expected. What should I be focusing on? And last one, there was an active breach. The departure was not amicable. I don't know if there is a kind of a dark cloud that's hanging over me as a result, as to an extent, I was made a scapegoat. What are my options? Is there a way to get out of this? So again, I know we don't have a lot of time. Maybe some of this we'll unpack in a later session, but if you could
Yeah.
give like a few bite-sized pearls of wisdom,
Sure.
Michael, I'd appreciate it.
The good news is that the number one and number two scenarios, I would do the exact same thing, right?
Okay.
We can consolidate those first, and a lot of people are probably tired of me saying this, but it is true. If you know that you're even remotely thinking about being active in the market, you need to hone in on what your superpower is. You need to understand who you actually are from a branding perspective. I think way too many security leaders have reacted to the fact that they're going to be the everything to everyone because that's what the job descriptions are saying. So CISOs have to realize that they should not react to what job descriptions say. That's not the reality of how this works. It's hard. I get it, but it's kind of a trap, right? You see a job description and it has all these things. You're like, I need to be all those things. That's not true. Just because the role claims that it needs everything, you need to figure out what your superpower is, hone in on that. And once they realize you're an expert at one thing, they will give you credit for being an expert at these other things, or at least have the propensity to get there, right? So many of the CISOs that I see try to send me resumes and backgrounds that they're a mile wide and an inch deep. I don't want to see that. I want to see who you think you actually are. What is your superpower? Or you can have multiple superpowers, especially if you're super senior. You're going to have great experience in each of these areas. So I want to see what those examples are. So really hone in on what your superpower is. And in addition to that, establish who you are and your brand publicly, right? Create more opportunities for you to talk about those things that you're going to be better than 99.9% of the people in the world. That thing, whatever that is, if it's specific area in AppSec, if it's a certain kind of data and healthcare data or fintech data or whatever it is, but basically have a theme and stick to it. Don't say I'm technical, right? That doesn't really help me. Say I built something at this scale for this kind of company and I've done it multiple times, which makes me an expert in these areas, which I will then, and hopefully other people will then be able to translate that into other areas that match of like companies. And then in doing that, kind of find ways to create more content and artifacts that will help that story, right? I'm not saying that everyone should just go out there and do podcasts, give the Lord, but find the thing that works for you. Is it writing? Is it could be a book, right? It could be a podcast, could be panels, could be a blog, it could be a white paper. You could, contribute to a non-for-profit. You can contribute to an open source project. There's so many avenues right there, but find out who that brand is, right? The other thing is you need to immediately set aside time to date, right? I call it dating, right? You go out and you go on that first date. I'm not saying you should get engaged on the first opportunity that comes your way, but definitely get yourself ready to get dated. Get your LinkedIn profile and your resume to the place where you want it. Start thinking about time management and set aside Fridays for interviews or whatever it is. But maybe like once a month or once every few weeks, go on a first date, right? Sharpen those skills. The interview process these days is a little bit different than it was 4, 5, 10 years ago. The kinds of questions are different, which we can unpack another time. The other thing is that I would say the networking is good. It's not great, right? And what I mean by that is if you're trying to just say, well, I'm just going to be an open networker, right? That is not a really great use of your time, especially when you're trying to hone in on your superpower, right? Now you're trying to be everything to everybody. I see CISOs do this all the time, and they move from this kind of closed loop, I was not in the market, to suddenly I'm like dating everything and talking to everyone. It's less productive. It's super distracting. It doesn't really say a lot about your focus. So you've had this amazing career, and now you're just like, I'm just going to go out and go wild and connect to everyone and talk to everyone. That there's a time and place for that, and but you can do it. But I think it's really true that we have to be very focused. And those are some things there. And by the way, working with executive search, I'll make this one last point. Like, we're good too, but we're good to build relationships with in advance. The good ones will want to do that. The good executive searchers will want to do that. In this type of market, you need someone to be able to tell your story, right? And executive search folks tend to be pretty good at that, right? They offer a lot of context, but we're only as valuable as the searches we have in front of us, right? And the ones that we're managing. We're not a concierge service. A lot of people think of me as that way. I actually had a colleague at a VC say this the other day, and I love the way that she present. Like, I'm not a concierge service. Like, you don't just say, "Here, I'm looking for these 5 things, and I'm going to go set up your Italian restaurant dinner for 2 near the window," right? Like, that's not how this works, right? So, just understand how the give and take works, and what we would recommend on your personal brand. Um, but that there's now the person that I think that well the other scenario was if you're was it you're out of a job? Was that the third
Mhm.
one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a tough one, right? It's a tough place for that, especially if you've been working for a really long time, and this is the first time that you've been out of a job. I don't unfortunately have I don't have that silver bullet answer for you. But vCISO has been a kind of a go-to solution for that. Last year at this time, it was a little bit more open. This year is much more crowded, but I have not seen many people, if they're really good, I've not seen them have too much trouble finding vCISO work or fractional CISO work, if you want to call it that. They just need to understand that it's crowded, and they need to understand that flexing a new muscle, like doing your own business development, sucks.
We
so
haven't done it in a
so they need
while.
to understand that. Go in. It's just hard. It's hard. You might get your first job. It might be easy. Like your first contract might be super easy. It was a friend, or someone was like, "Hey, Misha, what are you doing now? We'd love for you to come in and help us with our strategy." You're like, "Great, I got new work." That one dries up, and it's like, "Okay, now where do I go?" Most of them don't know where to go, and so that's the trouble. But it is a good solution. Um, and then people are pounding the job boards, right? LinkedIn, you put a CISO role out there, you're going to get 700-800 applicants right now. Doesn't mean they're all matched. But blending that a little bit with your network, figuring out, again, going back to how to hone in on your superpower. Who were you as a CISO? Who do you want to be? Let's get out there. Start local. Don't go big yet. Kind of find your voice and get out there.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, so I always a lot of people just start blowing things out there. It's like, go find your voice first because it's not very defined, right? It sounds like it's kind of scattershot everywhere. And then they go do that, and it just sounds much better.
Also see some people going like VC route, either they're kind of CISO in residence or even opening up their own shops like Cyber Starts. I'm not sure if you're
Yep,
familiar with
sure.
them.
Yeah, so the
Going to
VC route's great. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
academia, start teaching, or is just kind of to stay in the game and be sharp while continue looking. It just gives you more leverage if you're not if you're kind of if you don't have leverage, if you're desperate, you tend to make suboptimal choices.
I agree with all that. I agree with all that. And yeah, the VC route is good. Just remember the VCs, I love them. I work with them every day. But if you're getting yourself into a VC network, maybe not right now because they're going to be helping you kind of network. But once you get that job, the train is never late. They're going to want you to talk to their investments who are in the security space, and they're going to want you to be a beta customer or an alpha customer or some the train's never late, right? They can't help themselves. They're always going to try to sell to you, and that's fine, right? It actually gives you an opportunity to work with these smaller companies and really help to find their product. There's a lot of good that comes out of that. There's also a lot of salespeople that come out of that too. So
Sure,
not that they're bad. Not that they're bad. I'm not saying sales, but I'm just saying it can be distracting. It could kind of move you away from your focus. So just understand what you're getting into there as well. So yeah, but all those things work. All those things work.
Well, and the last one, I know if you have a moment of someone who's
Yeah,
left after the breach, is there any hope for people like that?
of course. I actually think those with breach experience are much more attractive to me.
Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually look for people that have been through breaches. Now, how they handle it, and what their response was, both, I look at three things. One, how did they prepare their company for the eventuality of a breach? And it is an eventuality, right? There's only kind of two kinds of companies out there: those that have been breached and know about it, and those that have been breached and didn't know about it. Everyone's susceptible right now. So how did they prepare their company? How did they focus in on these risks, and how did they narrate it? That's the first thing. Second thing is How do they go about the remediation and the response? Was the relationship and the openness in the company there where the CISO actually led that response, right? Were they the narrator? Were they involved? Maybe not publicly, but I'm sure they have a spokesperson that's doing that. But how do they actually? What were the words they used? How did they describe it? And how would they describe it? Because they need to continue to recruit and get more people to help, and so how do they go ahead and do that? And then the third thing is, how did they protect themselves, right? Were they on the D&O policy? Were they indemnified? Like all these things. Did they have a parachute clause? I look at all those things collectively and decide, this is certainly a candidate that's well prepared in these things. So, but I do look for those, and most of my allies do too. I think I don't want to say you're not a CISO until you've been breached, but there is something there that if you've been through that environment, the thing that you've been preparing for, and you can live through it and talk through it and learn from it. And by the way, you don't have to be perfect. No one's a lot of people are gonna make mistakes, right? Especially your first time around. But that's the sign of a great CISO, in my opinion.
Totally. Well, it's kind of like you get battle scars that will help you down the line.
Yeah, I don't want to go get surgery from a surgeon that's never done this particular surgery before, right?
That's
I don't.
very good. That's a very good way to put it.
Yeah,
Michael,
I don't want to take my unique car to a mechanic that's never. I think I can fix this. I've done something similar.
I'll
No,
just
don't touch
I'll
my.
just read the
Don't,
manual. I'll read the manual.
yeah, exactly.
Michael,
I'll go to YouTube and figure it out, right? That's what it is. Of
Michael, you've been so generous with your time. I'm so
course, yeah,
appreciative.
no problem.
I can already tell you that every other thing you say could be like a quote in a not on TikTok, on LinkedIn, but there will be so much valuable content, valuable insights, and that a lot of people in our community will find extremely valuable. And I thank you. This was very, very, very helpful.
My pleasure. And I hope everyone is safe out there. If they ever need any assistance, I'm happy to kind of talk through it. And I really appreciate you having me. It's great to see you again. The best to you and your family.
Thank you so much.